You're listening to the Shamash Alidina radio show. Listen, learn, enjoy.
Hello, and a warm welcome back to my show. This week we have meditation teacher Sharon Salzberg. Sharon is actually one of America's leading spiritual teachers and is co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts. She played a key role in bringing Asian meditation practices to the Western world. The foundations of her teaching are an ancient Buddhist practice of vipassana, which is mindfulness, and metta, which is loving-kindness. She's author of many excellent books, including Loving-Kindness, The Power of Meditation, and Real Happiness, which I think is a new title. So first of all, I'd like to warmly welcome you to the show today, Sharon, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
So just to start off with, I just wanted to go right back to your first experience of meditation, and can you remember that? And what was it like, and who taught you?
I can remember it, even though it was quite a long time ago. I went to India to learn how to meditate as part of a university program. It was sort of like a year abroad. And I wandered around India for a few months trying to find just the right situation to suit me, because I wasn't really interested in the philosophy so much, and I certainly wasn't interested in becoming a Buddhist or calling myself a particular thing. I wanted to know if there were some very practical, pragmatic tools that I could use to change my own mind, to change my own life. And it took a while to find just that kind of situation. I finally found it in the context of an intensive 10-day meditation retreat led by SN Goenka. The town was Bodh Gaya, which is the town that's sort of built around the tree, the descendant of the tree the Buddha was said to have been sitting under when he became enlightened. And when I walked through those monastery gates, I had never meditated before for one single second in my entire life. And the first instruction that Goenkaji offered was sit down and feel your breath. And there was a part of me that was a little bit distressed, actually, and I thought, feel my breath. You know, I came all the way to India. Where's the magical, esoteric, fantastic technique that's going to wipe out all my suffering and make me a perfectly happy person? Like, feel my breath. And then I thought, how hard can this be? And it was like, whoa, this isn't so easy, is it? And yet, at the same time, that it was very challenging. My mind wandered all of the time. I had all the normal hindrances. I had absolutely a sense of this is right, this is correct, this is where I want to be, this is what I want to be learning.
So it was one of those intensive 10-day retreats in total silence, was it?
In those days, they actually were not in total silence. We had silent periods, we had silent days, but the rest of the time we were talking.
Okay. And that was taught by SN Goenka himself, was it?
Yes.
And
so
so,
this was 1971.
all right. And did you get to speak to him personally, or was it just through the group that you learned the practice?
Well, it was, there was a kind of informality. I think this was maybe the third retreat he'd ever taught, and we would gather around him at night and just ask questions, and it was very, different than as any process, any endeavor grows and gets more formalized, it was a very different feeling then.
Sure. And was there a particular moment where you thought, actually, this is so good, I want to, take this up in a more serious and dedicated way and really want to dedicate my life to the practice and teaching of it? Was there a particular moment?
No, never the teaching of it. I mean, that was not in my mind at all. And I don't know that I thought I want to take this up for the rest of my life, but that sense of homecoming or the rightness of it was so strong that I knew this was something I needed to pursue. I was 18 at the time. I don't think I ever thought about the rest of my life,
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. So at what point did it become kind of a bit more serious for you, and you wanted to, really spend more time doing it?
Well, I think it was serious from the beginning, because I stayed on in but Gaia, I stayed on a little bit past my allotted year in India for study. I came back to the States just to do what I needed to do to finish school, and then went back to India. The reason I sort of differentiated being a student from being a teacher is because they were very different in my own mind. I never thought of myself as on the path to becoming a teacher. I left India again for the second time in 1974 and went to see one of my other very important teachers, this woman named Palma, just to say goodbye and tell her, I'd be back as soon as I could possibly get back, and I would, my determination at that time was to spend the entire rest of my life in India being a student and practicing, and I couldn't imagine anything else. And so when I went to see her in Calcutta and to say goodbye, she said, well, when you go back to America, you'll be teaching with Joseph. It's Joseph Goldstein, who left India about 6 months or so before I had. She said, you'll be teaching with Joseph. And I said, no, I won't. And she said, yes, you will. I said, no, I won't. And she said, yes, you will. I said, no, I won't. And she said two things that were really very important for me. One was, she said, you really understand suffering. That's why you should teach. And that was extraordinary because one doesn't normally think of one's suffering as a credential, for deeper understanding and compassion. And that's exactly what she was saying, that it is an important qualification. And the other thing she said was, you can do anything you want to do. It's your thinking that you can't do it that's going to stop you. And off I went, still thinking, oh, she's totally wrong. And then I came back to the States, and Joseph by this time had gotten an offer to teach for the inaugural summer session of Naropa Institute, which was the first Buddhist university established in the States by Trungpa Rinpoche, and it was the very, very beginning. And I arrived in Boulder to visit him maybe 2 weeks before the end of the first summer session, and Jack Kornfield was teaching there, and the three of us kind of got together in a way, deciding, we'll see what happens from this. And out of that first summer, Joseph and I got invited to teach a retreat, and then there was another retreat, and all this time I was thinking, this is just temporary. I'm going to go back to India soon. And then we ended up establishing the Insight Meditation Society in Barron, Massachusetts, and one day I realized, I don't live there anymore. I live here, and I'll always go back to visit and to practice, but Deepama, in fact, was correct.
Oh, wow. And did you ever go back to see Deepama?
Mm-hmm.
You did?
I went back to see her. We brought her to the States.
Okay.
Several times. She was a really extraordinary teacher.
Okay. And did she teach vipassana and metta, just like you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And so, had you met kind of Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein before? Was it the first time you met each other?
Well, I knew Joseph in India. I met him at my first retreat, actually, in 1971. Jack I met for the first time in Boulder at Naropa Institute in 1974. And it took about 2 years of just responding to invitations as they came in before we actually established the Insight Meditation Society. We moved in February 14th, 1976.
All right. And could you just for the listeners that don't know, could you say a little bit more about what the Insight Meditation Society now does?
Yeah, it was, at the time we bought it, it was a Catholic novitiate, and we've sort of built it up since. So we've got, we actually have, now there are 3 centers there, or one center with 2 parts, and then another center. The original building, which we now call the Retreat Center, was the novitiate, and we have a series of intensive retreats there. Mostly they're silent, not all of them. We have one retreat for families, which is actually going on right now. That's not silent. We have one retreat for teenagers, which just ended. That's also silent. But most of them are like immersion courses where you come for 2 or 3 or 7 or 9 days or longer, and there's a lot of guidance, there's a lot of structure. All your needs are taken care of. Someone's cooking for you, really wonderful food, and you get to explore awareness, mindfulness, and loving kindness and compassion in a very intensive way. So it's a beautiful experience. And then we built another complete center from the ground up called the Forest Refuge, which is in the forest sort of behind the retreat center, and that's for people who have some experience in meditation who don't need that kind of structure, with bells ringing and schedule and so on. And there's still teacher contact, but it's all less although the teacher contact is formalized, a lot of the rest of the time it's very self-generated. And that's a beautiful experience too. And then down the road we have the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, which does programs that are more exploring issues culling both from the Buddhist teaching and from everyday life. So there might be a week-long program on psychology east and west, or a day-long program exploring right livelihood. The Buddha talked about right livelihood and not causing harm, but what does that mean in our time, in our cultures, So it's also a really fantastic place.
Wow. And you mentioned these more intensive retreats, so I suspect you've been engaged in some quite long periods of silence too. How do you find that experience of being in silence and practicing meditation for long periods of time?
I personally love it. I think as a teacher, when I see people coming even for short periods, I think that probably any retreat that I teach, 2 days, 7 days, 9 days, will have about 50% of the people completely new to IMS, and some percentage of them new to meditation practice altogether. So very often, as people look toward their first retreat experience, the single most kind of weird and disturbing thought is one of silence. How am I going to be silent? And I don't know if I'm going to like silence. And people arrive sometimes and they say, well, I don't think I can do the silent part, or my partner says they don't think I can do the silent part. Somebody once showed up and said they're doing a kind of betting pool at my office to see how long it is before I break the silence. And, so it's very intimidating and kind of strange, but almost always at the end of the experience, having actually had the experience and not just the thought about it, it's the single most beautiful aspect people point to. It's like for once in our lives we can be a little bit quiet and also turn to ourselves. We're so busy usually presenting ourselves to others to gain some kind of affirmation in their eyes, like I'm interesting, or I'm really sad, or whatever it is, and we lose touch with ourselves. And so it's such a wonderful opportunity to really trust our own experience, and so it's quite great. So I personally enjoy it quite a lot. More of a challenge for me from my early days sitting with Goenka was not reading, and it's not that reading is bad or that you're forbidden to read, but sometimes we rely excessively on reading about someone else's experience, even their spiritual experience, rather than having our own. So the encouragement is to, again, turn to your own experience. And I thought, how am I going to live without reading?
But you find
but I can, yes, of course.
You survived.
I survived.
Okay. What would you say you find most helpful about meditation for you in your personal life?
Well, sometimes it's a hard question for me to answer because it's been so long. I mean, I began in 1971, and it's been the core of my life ever since. I think it's the place where I go to make things real. I think in many cases we might share the same values. We might say awareness is a good thing, or getting in touch with the whole range of your emotional landscape is a good thing, or having more compassion for yourself and for others is a good thing. And we can, certainly I can, stay really mired in the abstract notion of that.
Mm.
But when I sit down to practice is when I am working to make it real. And I'm facing the challenges to that, and I'm also being able to apply those principles in newer and broader and more inclusive situations. And it feels so essential to step out of just that realm of concept to really breathing life into something.
Yeah. It's quite useful for people to sometimes kind of hear examples. I don't know if you kind of get in touch when you're teaching people on a personal level, but I don't know if you may be able to think of an example of someone who's managed to overcome something like depression or addiction or something like that through coming to IMS, through coming to the meditation, or through learning with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples, but I think, many times these days, especially meditation is seen as an adjunct. People may be doing psychotherapy or doing some other program, and we certainly encourage people to continue on with all of those programs, but it's their therapists themselves who will suggest, or maybe you should add meditation to what you're doing. And it isn't always in the form of an intensive retreat. There's so many classes and cities and different centers around where you can learn meditation and get very profound instructions in it without going off to a retreat if that particular form is not appropriate for your life situation at the moment. But I think what I've seen, say, with depression, is that even as a person may continue their medication or may continue psychotherapy, there's a certain facility, first of all, to know what you're feeling. Something like depression is so vague in a way, and yet oppressive. And if we look at and can distinguish the different feelings, sadness, frustration, helplessness, whatever it is, that gives us a very different sense of our experience. And at the same time, we also see those things are always changing and moving. And the fog or the cloud of depression seems so inert, like it's never changing. It's so pervasive. But when we actually can use mindfulness to look at it, we see that even though it's very, very painful, each of those elements, that's actually an alive system, and that's a very different thing. And then with compassion, loving kindness and compassion, I think for all of us, whatever we're going through that's difficult, it's an extraordinary thing to be able to distinguish the actual experience, a range of thoughts or feelings or habits or tendencies, whatever it is, and to distinguish that from what we add to that, like, this is all that I am. I'm the most despicable person, and I should have been able to stop this. And realizing that all of those add-ons don't actually help us change. They don't help us learn, and learning to let go of that and actually have some compassion for ourselves is a much better engine for true change.
Yeah, and the meditation helps to do that. Yeah, you mentioned mindfulness and meditation being used in a therapeutic way. I'd just be interested in kind of your thoughts about the fact that it's being taught in more of a secular way rather than through the traditional Buddhist tradition. And it's being used obviously for treating stress and depression, as we've touched. But what do you think about that, rather than being taught through a religion like Buddhism?
Well, as I said, Goenka was my first teacher, and the first night of my first retreat, he said, the Buddha did not teach Buddhism, the Buddha taught a way of life. And that was really my beginning. And so it's always been the practices of meditation, and they've always been embedded in a certain worldview, but not in a religion sense. And what I mean by worldview is something about willingness to explore and having a sense of a love of learning and being able to see that, well, perhaps compassion is not just a value we apply to others, it's something we can apply to ourselves. And that the way we live and the experiences we have are intertwined, that it's very, very hard, for example, to tell lies all week at work and then to sit down to meditate and seek the truth, It's just very tough to have your life compartmentalized in that way. And so within those contexts, then I don't think that the meditation practice needs to be done in a Buddhist sense or, a religious context at all. And so I think it's great.
Oh, that's good. That's good, yeah. And just mentioning all these different emotions, I think fear is one which often underlies a lot of difficult kind of so-called negative emotions. And I know in the past you've said that the key to a sense of fearlessness is to learn how to be afraid. Just wondering what you meant by that.
Well, I think like if something I often say is like when I look at my own fear, or when I have looked at my own fear in meditation, which is, it's like a laboratory, it's a time we can look at everything without needing to, in that particular moment, be responsible for action. We don't have to leap to our feet, make a phone call, or send an email. It's probably better if we don't, in fact. But it's the time to really examine and to understand things in a much deeper way. So, say fear would arise in my meditation practice, and so the first thing we do is, or another way of saying it is like commonly in life, we're entranced by the object of our emotions. If we really want something, we want a painting, for example, and we really, really want it, we spend a lot of time thinking about the painting and where in our house we're going to hang it, and what kind of lighting we'll need in order to really show it off. And it's very rare that we kind of pivot our attention to look at the wanting itself. Like, what does it feel like to want something so badly? And certainly the same with anger. We get lost in vengeful fantasies, or we go over and over and over the grievance. We don't usually turn our attention around and say, well, what is anger? What does it feel like? What's happening with this emotion? And the same with fear. So that was a big part of my learning, was to make that pivot and just look at the emotion without so many add-ons, like I'm always going to be afraid and I'm such a bad person or whatever it might be. And so looking at my own fear, one of the interesting things I discovered was that despite the very common statement we might hear or make, like, we're afraid of the unknown, I would see more predominantly in myself, like, of course I'm afraid of the unknown, but much more predominantly I get afraid or I get lost in fear when I think I do know and it's going to be really bad. And I'm telling myself these stories, well, first this is going to happen, then that's going to happen, and that's going to happen, and it's going to be really bad. That's when fear is very pronounced in me, and when I remind myself in those situations, well, actually, I don't know, then I feel a sense of relief. It's like space opens up. I don't know. I don't know that's going to happen. Let me just be with what is. And so it was a very different and personal take on the experience of fear. And I think for all of us, if we can turn our attention around and look at the feelings apart from what they're about and apart from our judgment of whether we should have them or not, we have the capacity to learn a lot.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it's about bringing a sense of curiosity to the emotion itself rather than all the other thoughts that kind of generate it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay. I kind of attended one of your retreats in London a couple of years ago, and I remember you mentioned a story about the Dalai Lama and the fact that you've met him. So I was wondering if if you could just share with listeners what it's like for you to have met the Dalai Lama and what he was like.
I don't remember which story, but because I've met him many times, there's one that I'm very fond of telling, which wasn't even the first time I met him, because I met him when I first went to India in 1971. And there too, it was a very different world. Things were very informal. When I came back and I started teaching, and we established the Insight Meditation Society in 1976, and then in 1979 we had heard that he was coming to the area in Massachusetts. He was coming to Amherst, which is about 45 minutes away. And he was going to be doing a lecture series. So we wrote to his private office, and being young and audacious, we wrote and said, hey, we're close by, maybe you'd like to visit us too. And to our amazement, we got a letter back saying, yeah, he would, he'll come. So even though, van security is nothing like it is now, still it was completely crazy for us. The center is about 2 miles outside of the actual town of Barrie on a little country road called Pleasant Street.
Mm.
We had to have Pleasant Street blockaded, and we had state troopers and police officers patrolling the roof of the center with guns, and it was so shocking. And,
wow.
And it was this very kind of crazy, tumultuous scene as he was, set to arrive. And just before that day, I'd been in a car accident, and I had a broken bone in one of my feet, and I was using crutches, and I was pretty clumsy with the crutches, so I was standing, the day came that he was going to arrive. I was standing in the back of a crowd of about 100 people waiting for him, and I was feeling very sorry for myself and feeling very alone. I was thinking, I started this place, and here I am stuck in the back, and I should be in the front, but I can't be in the front because with these crutches I'll probably fall on my face. That'd be even worse.
Mm.
I'd better stay in the back, but I'm so stuck in the back. It's so awful. And then his car came, and he got out of the car, and he did something I've seen him do many times since, but it felt like the first time I'd seen him do, which is that he seems to have a kind of radar for who in a crowd might be suffering the most. And,
wow.
And he goes there, and that was me. And he he got out of the car, he cut through 100 people, he came up to me, leaning on my crutches, and he took my hand, and he looked me in the eye, and he said, "What happened?"
Wow.
And it was such an amazing moment, because it actually was a moment that, in a way that has not changed, interestingly enough, defined compassion for me, because I saw in that moment that he couldn't make the car accident not have happened, and he couldn't make me any more skillful in my use of the crutches, but that terrible, debilitating feeling of being so alone and so stuck in the back and so unseen, so unacknowledged, that was gone.
Wow.
That could go. And so it was really this amazing lesson, right, just in that moment.
Wow. Yeah, that was the same story. That story stuck in my head too now. It's a lovely story. It's a beautiful story, and it just shows. He didn't actually know you, did he? No, he didn't. No. So he just saw that somebody was suffering.
India, but it's just like no, he didn't know me.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And you've met him since, you say, and what you've been to conferences with him, or you've been practicing?
Yeah,
sure, great. So a lot of your workshops and quite a few of your books focus on this area of kind of loving kindness and compassion. Just wondering why you focus on that particular aspect of the teaching.
Well, I went to Burma, and in 1985 to do an intensive 3-month period of loving kindness meditation. I'd known from my first exposure to meditation at all that such a thing existed. Goenka used it, but almost in a kind of ceremonial way for an hour to close the retreat. I knew you could also do it in a more intensive, structured fashion, but I'd never had the chance to do it. So that was my opportunity in going to Burma and studying the Sayadaw U Pandita. And I felt really transformed by it. It was, it was a powerful, powerful addition to my practice. And following that 3-month period in Burma, or including that 3-month period in Burma, I spent about 4 years just doing loving kindness practice. That was my practice, whether I was sitting each day or I was on retreat.
Wow.
At one point, I went to see U Pandita in Australia, and like 4 years later, and he said, "Okay, time to switch." And I wrote about that in my book, Faith, because it was that switch was important, and it was also very painful. And nowadays, it's a big adjunct to my practice. My daily sitting is usually more kind of awareness practice, but I have a kind of commitment to practice loving kindness whenever I'm waiting, and so I include every mode of transportation in waiting. So I may be waiting online in the grocery store, I may be on a bus or in a taxi or in an airplane, and rather than just waste the time or get fretful or something, I think, okay, I'm going to do loving kindness practice. And so I've seen, both with myself and with others, that it's a tremendously transforming experience. And I wrote the book Loving Kindness in 1995, I guess. And that became, because so many people, it was more unusual to have loving kindness practice taught rather than mindfulness or insight practice. And so that became, it was almost like an invitation for people to consider this practice as well. Nowadays, I'm very intrigued to see that while so much of the meditation research, the neuroscience and other kinds of research have focused on mindfulness, that there's a really powerful growing interest in studying compassion meditation as well.
Yeah, I don't know if you probably have met Christine Neff and Chris Germer, who seem to do quite a lot. Yeah. They seem to be really doing a lot of work in this field as well. Yeah. Excellent. So when you're practicing, like you say that when you're waiting or wherever you are, you try to practice loving kindness. So for you, what would you do in a practical way? What sort of things would you say in your mind or heart?
Well, actually, I recently had conversations with people who talk about practicing loving kindness without any phrases, but the way I learned, of course, is with phrases. So it's the silent repetition of basically phrases of inclusion and care. So with oneself, it may be, may I be happy, may I be peaceful. Looking at someone else, maybe you're standing online in the grocery store and you're looking at that clerk who's checking people out. So maybe, may you be happy, may you be peaceful. Or may all beings be happy, may all beings be peaceful. And it's like an experiment. I consider it an experiment in consciousness, because we're stretching. Maybe that clerk is the kind of person we usually look right through or ignore, or we just consider them an impediment to our happiness because they're so slow, or whatever it might be. And we're actually taking the time to look actually at them rather than through them. So it's a powerful experiment to see if the way we perceive somebody intentionally, not saying I love you and you're my best friend, so it's not phony or fake, but it's including them rather than ignoring them, if actually that will make a difference, and of course it does.
Okay. And I noticed on kind of the events that you're doing something coming up called Real Happiness and Fierce Compassion. I was just wondering what you meant by that concept of fierce compassion.
Is that what I'm doing in Vancouver? No, I'm doing that in Portland.
Yeah, end of the week.
I have to look. Well, I think that even in the, going back to Buddhism for a moment, in the Buddhist model of the mind and action, the actions that we take, the things we do, the things we say, we can look, first of all, at our motivation, which is very different than a Western concept, where our motive may not count as much, but in the Buddhist psychology, the motive or the intention behind the action is considered a very powerful part of the action. It's like I may hand you a book, and all anybody sees is my hand moving down and picking up an object and moving it forward. But what's in my heart, really? Maybe I'm giving you the book because I like you and because I want you to have it, or maybe I'm giving it to you because I see you have this other book. And I think, well, maybe I'll give you this one, and you'll give me that one, or maybe I'm giving it to you because I don't like you. And I think, well, right in the beginning, there's that passage that'll probably disturb you. But it's the same smile, it's the same gesture, and yet coming from a very different place. And so the motivation of an action is considered very, very important and very powerful. So the arena of the mind, of the psyche, that is said to be transformed by meditations like loving kindness or compassion meditation is the arena of motivation. So why we do things. So that if, by and large, we have been coming from a place of fear or alienation in what we do or what we say, we do these practices, and we find more and more we are coming from a place of care or connection. So that's the first thing, is why we do things, or the motivation. And the second arena of an action is basically the skillfulness or the unskillfulness of what we choose to do. And that demands a kind of mindfulness in a bigger context. It demands a kind of discernment. So people often confuse the two, and they think, well, if I'm coming from a loving place, I can only smile and say yes, and be meek and be acquiescent, and let them move in and let them take all my money or whatever it might be. But we might genuinely be coming from a loving or compassionate place, and our best guess of the most appropriate, most skillful thing to do in a particular context might be really intense. It might be fierce. It might be saying no. It might be saying, well, no, I can't give you any more money, or whatever it might be. And that's where the fierce compassion can come in. We might be in that position where we're distinctly and genuinely coming from a compassionate place, and our best sense of how to act is really pretty fierce.
I'm really glad you said that, because I think that's the tendency for some people, or a misunderstanding of the teaching, in that compassionate means you're really nice to everyone and you kind of say yes to everyone, which can obviously be dangerous. So that having that sense of balance, I suppose, and that sense of a fierce compassion. I haven't heard that concept before, but I think I like it. That's a good idea. Okay. As we kind of come towards the end of the program, I was wondering if you could offer some kind of really practical tips to the listeners for helping them to kind of cultivate this greater sense of self-kindness and to overcome self-critical thoughts that a lot of people have.
Well, I think any meditation technique, actually, even the one I started with that Goenka offered of sit down and feel your breath, will, even if it's never spoken about, it necessarily, it will involve the deepening and development of self-compassion, because, like when I sat down and I began and I thought, oh, how hard can this be? I also thought, oh, what's it going to be, like 800 breaths or 900 breaths before my mind wanders? And to my absolute shock, it was like one or two or maybe three, sometimes half a breath, and I would just be gone, and I'd be way gone. And it would be quite some time before I'd realize, oh, the breath. But that's considered a really crucial moment. Like, in that moment when you realize it's been quite some time since I last felt the breath, our usual tendency is to just go on a tirade of self-judgment. I'm so bad, I'm so terrible, I keep getting lost. No one else is getting lost. Whereas if we are cognizant of what's possible in that moment, we realize that's the moment, we can be really different. We can actually practice being kind to ourselves and just letting go of the distraction, whatever it was, and coming back to the breath. And so the only way we really can let go and begin again is through the deepening of kindness. And so we're always practicing it, and that brings us to the basic issue, which is that we need to practice. Meditation is one of those things where it's like I was saying before, we can hold it as an abstract value. It's very, very hard to actually sit down to do it, or it doesn't have to be sitting, but whatever posture, to really set aside some time, even if it's 20 minutes a day. It's difficult, but I think the everydayness of it is essential more than any particular time. If it's going to be 5 minutes, only let it be 5 minutes, whatever it is, but it's the doing of it that's really important. And if you can commit to a certain length of experiment, like it doesn't mean you have to do a practice for the rest of your life, never knowing if it's bringing any results or benefits. But if you can say, okay, I'm going to just try this for a month, instead of every day thinking, am I different?
Yeah.
Just say, I'm going to put my heart into this. I'm going to try for 5 to 20 minutes a day for a month or 3 months or whatever it is, and then I'm going to assess, has it made any difference? Then that's a really good way to establish a practice.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think you've written a book on a 28-day program, haven't you? So is that based on like gradually increasing the amount of time you spend meditating every day? And it's got some, is it mindfulness of breath and also compassion, or is it mainly just...
It's got a very wide range of practices, actually.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully the listeners will check it out. So I'd just like to finish by saying thank you very much for your wonderful answers. I'd also like to thank you in a big way for your generous way in which you've kind of given your life to helping others to be more mindful and more compassionate.
Well, thank you so much. It's really been a delight.
Thank you. And if listeners would like to find out more, then you can check out Sharon's books, either on Amazon or any other website, or you could go to sharonsalzberg.com. And I highly, highly recommend her work.